what does he mean when he says, you should love the Lord your God? Okay. So I said to myself, I think the Lord must give us hints and clues. He doesn't leave us out wondering. And I looked even in the Old Testament, and I went back to Deuteronomy, because this, as I said, this is a reference that Jesus makes to a section of Deuteronomy 6. In a much later section, but the same book, Deuteronomy 30. I wonder if you open that up. I don't know. Can you fly down backwards to Deuteronomy chapter 30? Deuteronomy 30, and if you find the 15th verse, Moses is inspired to say this to the people of God. After he had that long section where he reiterated, that's what Deuteronomy is, the second telling of the law of God. Near the end now, and he's given out the law, he then says, Moses then says, see, I have set before thee this day life and good and death and evil. In that I command thee this day to love the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commandments, and his statutes, and his judgments, and that thou mayest live and multiply. And the Lord thy God shall bless thee in the land whither thou goest to possess it. But if thine heart turn away, so that thou wilt not hear, but shalt be drawn away and worship other gods and serve them, I denounce unto you this day, that ye shall surely perish, and that ye shall not prolong your days upon the land, whither thou goest whither thou passest over Jordan to go to possess it. I call heaven and earth to record this day against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both thou and thy seed may live. And then this 20th verse is very educational. That thou mayest love the Lord thy God, and that thou mayest obey his voice, and that thou mayest cleave unto him. For he is thy life and the length of thy days, that thou mayest dwell in the land which the Lord sware unto thy fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to give them. Now, I think the key here is the sections where he says, he commands you to love the Lord thy God, and then he has other commands. Did you notice? Just to put your attention one more time to the verse, 16? Verse 16. I command thee this day to love the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways, to keep his commandments and his statutes and his judgments. Tied in together, it's like he's knitting them together. It's like it's a mesh. Is loving the Lord thy God and keeping his commandments.
All right.
And so a picture came into my mind. Is there a correspondence between loving God and keeping his commandments? And it's reinforced in that 20th verse where he says it again. That thou mayest love the Lord thy God, but he knits it together with, thou mayest obey his voice, that's obedience, and that thou mayest cleave unto him. In other words, stay close, not move away from the place that he's put you. So he's tied together, at least in this passage, loving God and obeying God.
All right.
And so if that's a fair comparison, if that really is a way of defining what love is, loving God is obeying him and cleaving to him, staying close to him. If that's fair, then when Jesus says you're supposed to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and all thy soul, and all thy mind, he could transplant another word like, thou shalt obey the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind.
All right.
Or thou shalt cleave to the Lord thy God.
Yes.
With all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind. If that's a good way of defining love, we could just replace the word love with obey, or with cleave, or with Well, those are the two words. We can replace the word love with those words, and we have a picture of what love means. And amazingly, that leaves no room for sentiment.
All right.
Nowhere does he say, have a feeling for me.
No.
At least with the definition. Let's give it a Deuteronomy, right?
All right.
Feel a certain way about me. Be tenderhearted to me. God, who is the interpreter of all our feelings, he would know what we feel. So it's not that it would be impossible for him to use that as a measuring. He can measure whether or not we feel tender towards him because he knows our hearts intimately. But that's not even the test he makes. He tells his servant Moses to tell them to obey. I've given you these instructions, obey. And that he corresponds to loving him. If you love me, this is what you do. Woo! I said to myself, that seems so Old Testament, don't it? I said, that's the old covenant. I'll get out. Would that hold up if I compared that to the New Testament?
All right.
Well, John records in his gospel a couple of quotes from Jesus directly. Let's compare, for example, John chapter 14, verse 15. And I say Moses has a beautiful, I love Moses when he speaks, because he's got a kind of important sounding way of speaking. John says Jesus cuts right to the crux of the matter in his little discourse that he had about whether or not you were abiding in the vine. And he goes into that discourse in the 14th chapter, but when he gets to, well, actually it's in the 15th chapter, but in the 14th chapter, as he's building up to the true vine commentary that's going to make in the next chapter, he does make this statement in the 15th verse, though. If ye love me, keep my commandments.
Yes.
And I heard one time a preacher tell me that the if of the book of John is not an if of condition. It's actually since. It's the if that intends that since you love me, this is what you're supposed to do. This is what you have to do. Since you love me, keep my commandments. Or chapter 15, right in the midst of that discourse on the true vine, verses 9 and 10. As the Father hath loved me, so have I loved you. Continue ye in my love. How do we do that, Jesus? 10 verse. If you keep my commandments, ye shall abide, you shall stay, you shall continue in my love. And he goes even deeper. This is I don't know. This stuff just blows my mind. He said, even as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. And he corresponds himself, he compares himself to us. And Jesus says, it's because I have kept the Father's commandments that I have stayed in his love. Now, I can't even imagine that there would be a situation where Jesus wasn't in the love of the Father. But Jesus makes it very clear. He says, but there is a correspondence there. Now, he may have not had it as he may have not been capable of not obeying the Father. I don't even know if that was possible. But his point was that when you obey, that's what keeps you in the love of God. And he said that principle worked for me as well as it's going to work for you. All right. Had it even been possible that I didn't obey my Father, if at Gethsemane I had said, you know what? I don't like the dregs that are in the cup. Elder Parker's three-step. Look at that. I don't want to drink this cup. Let this cup pass.
Yes.
He would not have abided in the love of the Father. Obedience was required of Christ. Now, if sonship couldn't keep him from being obedient, what hope do we have?
That's right.
If we're not obedient?
That's right.
If God wouldn't have slacked up for the Son, if he wouldn't have cut a little slack for the Son, where are you going to be if you're not obedient?
That's right. Hallelujah.
That's what determines whether you stay in the love of God. All right. So it sits there. It sits there. Whether you got the Old Testament, you got the New Testament. The love of God is shown by our obedience to the commandments of God. I won't argue whether the Old Testament commandments, I don't think they directly apply in the way that they did for the Jews. But Christ came along and became some new commandments. We never got our way from being told to do some things, told not to do some things. Whether it was Moses or it was Christ, somebody was telling us this is what you need to do. And the question becomes, are we living up to what we've been told? And God says, love me, he means do that. Do that which I told you to do. That's how you're going to show that you love me. Because do what I asked you to do. My goodness.